All right, today we'll be talking about the month of Elul from a Chasidus perspective based on the works of the Sfas Emes. And the first thing we're going to do is look at the verse that is most oftentimes associated with Elul, which is found in Shir Hashirim, in the Song of Songs. Ani lidodi v'dodi li. I am to my beloved as my beloved is to me. And if you look at the first letters of each one of the words in that verse, it spells out the word Elul. Now, we have to develop that thought a lot more, because if all that is that the words in the verse spell out the words Elul, the first words in the verse spell out the words Elul, and that's the connection to Elul, and this verse is going to be brought up so many times in reference to Elul, I mean, it just seems coincidental, but it can't be coincidental. So we have to go deeper, because we really want to understand about what are we supposed to be doing on Elul, what are we supposed to be thinking about, at least from a Hasidic perspective. So the first thing the Sfas Emes says is we have to look up a piece from the Chiddushei Arim. The Chiddushei Arim was the Sfas Emes' grandfather. And he says the key to understanding Elul can be found in Perek Kuf, Perek 100, uh, uh, chapter 100 of Tehillim, Psalms. Something we read every day is known as Mizmor L'Soda. And if you see in bold, it says, Veloy anachnu amo own mariso, which I have translated as, we are to him, his nation, the flock of his pasture. So he says, understanding that is the key to understanding Elul. So sometimes in the Torah, and even in Tanakh, we have what's called the Kri Ketiv, which means that in the Torah, the word might be written one way, but it is pronounced another way. And so in the brackets, you see that I have the word veloi spelled two different ways. So the way that it is read and the way that it is translated are, we are to him, his nation, the flock of his pasture. But the way that it is spelled, it would read something like this. Like, we are nothing. We, his nation, are nothing. The flock of his pasture. Now, we have to examine this duality in this verse, and think about the meanings. So the Chidushei Arim says that they're both true, and they tell us about how we should be approaching Elul. When we see ourselves as nothing, meaning, so to speak, not nothing in terms of like that we're garbage, that's not what we're talking about here, but nothing as we are meant here to serve God, not ourselves. We're batal, that's the Hebrew word, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then we are the flock of his pasture. That's how he says, like, you should interpret it, like in the negative. And through being viloi, we come viloi. Through being nothing, like viloi, we come viloi. We become his. Okay, so I'm basically saying that through us subjugating our will to the will of God, we become attached with him. We become his nation. We become the flock of his pasture. That is the right hashkafa that we have to have. That's the right viewpoint. How does that relate, though, to El? How do you see an allusion to El in this verse? So, very simply, the end of the part that we just read, Vitsoin Mariso, is means the flock of his pasture. And when it comes to bringing tithes, you have to bring tithes from the flock of your pasture. That is something you have to do if you own sheep, right? All the sheep that were born that year, what you're going to do is you're going to put them in a corral, and they're going to go through the corral, and every 10th sheep, you're going to smack it on its back with like red dye. And you'll know that that is something that you have to bring to Jerusalem. Because the Torah says you have to do tithes, and that's how you like do the tithes. And you do that for your flock. Now, the cutoff date, because there's a fiscal year for everything in the Torah. The fiscal year of when you decide which group of animals gets brought as part of this fiscal year and which group of animals gets brought part of the next fiscal year, that is decided on Rosh Chodesh Elul. So the idea of flocks and is directly connected to Elul. Like the rest of the verse, Bo'u Sharav, come to his gates. Meaning, where do you take these animals? You take these animals, like sometimes, like when it comes to tithes and stuff, you take them to Jerusalem, aka Hashem's gate. And in Hebrew, this verse is called Meiser Behema. So, Meiser Behema is something literal and physical that you would do. But it doesn't end there. You're supposed to reflect on this. And you're saying that essentially you're taking something animalistic, like an animal, and you're elevating it as a tithe to God, meaning that you are supposed to do the same thing to yourself. You are supposed to take your animalistic inclination, your selfishness, because that's what defines animals. They're usually animals can be like they're typically more like selfish. And if you see a human being that's selfish, that's just because they haven't refined themselves. The whole idea of what should separate a godly human between an ungodly human is their selfishness. Like we say, that person ate like an animal, meaning he didn't leave food for other people. He wasn't thinking about other people. He was focused on his sole animalistic little survival. Hashem put the mitzvah, like the cutoff date, and he associated the Meiser Behema with Elul, so that we in Elul would do the same thing to ourselves and do reflection and say, okay, I've got to, so to speak, put myself aside and lift up myself, take my animalistic inclination and lift it up, so to speak, like aka like a truma, a meiser, lifting it up to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and dedicate it to Hashem. That is the interpretation of the verse in Mizmor Lasoda, velo, velo. Through us being veloi, through us being like nothing, being bottle, and that we aren't selfish. We aren't thinking about the us. We're thinking about Hashem. We become veloi, we become Him. And that's the meaning of ani lidodi vidodi li, right? When I am to my beloved, meaning when I'm not me, I'm like to my beloved. Everything is to him. Everything is about his focus. Veloi, veloi. It's like the same type of thing. It's the same idea. So these verses teach us about what we are supposed to be doing during the month of Elul. Nullification to the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And how can a person do that practically? Well, do you ever notice that almost every single Elul, we always read Parsha Shoftim. Parsha Shoftim always falls within Elul. Shoftim v'shotrim titein lecha. You should place um, uh, um, uh, judges and guardians in all of your gates. That's what the verse says. That's not a coincidence. That is teaching you. You're supposed to appoint judges for yourself, and you're supposed to do a cheshbon and nefesh. You're supposed to do reflection. And shotrim, you're supposed to place police officers. So meaning that perhaps that could mean putting a filter on your phone, setting limits and setting boundaries, honing in your nefesh habahamis, honing in that animalistic inclination, meaning holding it back, pulling in the reins, so to speak, and dedicating it and taking away that selfishness and dedicating yourself to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. All right, so may we all merit to have a very successful Elul.